Chase back with Sanho. We're doing a little post-game podcast. We're actually doing this Tuesday evening, so it's been a few days since the game. I have been in Las Vegas and have just returned, and I'm exhausted, but I'm doing my best here. Sanho, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'll try and carry the energy load for you. You're probably still recovering.
I appreciate that greatly. So I guess there's an elephant in the room as far as what happened on Saturday. So since you're going to be carrying the load, why don't you take the reins a little bit here and just give us your global thoughts on that performance?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think it's fairly obvious that the dam is broken, and it felt like it's actually very similar to the moment we were talking about last week, where it was we all kind of agreed that we felt that there was this moment coming where it was just going to be clear to everybody, because we've kind of thought about this stuff a lot, and we've talked about it, just sort of like some of the red flags along the way. You just sort of, I mean, they're all like, in the beginning, it starts off like very anecdotally, right? It's like really small stuff. Like, well, Kiffin was supposed to bring Chow and Davis, but he didn't. Like, that seems a little weird. We're supposed to have this kind of like this rock star staff that was going to kind of, be the training wheels for him until he got up and running. And then, once everything was rolling, we could change our minds later. But it felt like this would, like, enough of those things had accumulated that we got to the point where it's all that's left now is for that sort of tipping point moment.
This is the 22 players on the field for Paul Hackett against Tom Holmoe's Cal team.
It felt like that moment was coming. I personally didn't think it was going to happen until, if it did happen, until like conference play, like mid-year or something like that. We would have just been caught with an opponent we just had not game planned properly for, and we weren't able to adjust quickly enough on the fly, and just things snowballed and yada yada. Like, that's kind of what I envisioned. And instead, what we saw was, something I think anybody, even the casual football fan, could see and say, what's happening? Like, what is the plan here? I don't understand. It's just like a really puzzling, like, game plan and performance. And, I mean, obviously it leaves everybody feeling sick about the program. And, you start scrambling for answers, and it just turns into this, like, this anger fest. And you're just mostly, you're outraged, and you want things fixed. You want things fixed now, and whatever. It's unfortunate the way it all went down, but there's something to be salvaged here. I think the end of, like, this story that we're going to probably go through is a positive note, but it all depends kind of, like, how positive you feel about it depends on your posture going into Saturday's game.
Right. If you had a lot of hope, this is the ultimate backbreaker for that last feeling of, it can still happen here. We can still do it. We won the first game. It was ugly, but we won. So we still want to know. I still have my hope is still there.
Right. So whatever narrative you had kind of committed to, if you'd said, well, yeah, we started off against Hawaii, we were a little subpar, but we got everything rolling in 2011, so that pattern will repeat itself, you probably feel a lot of disappointment and anger and resentment. It's probably much more a shocking experience what happened on Saturday. I've been kind of the opinion that like a lot of us, that 2011 was an aberration. If you look at his entire body of work, that the strong likelihood is that we're going to see something much more similar to 2012. Maybe not quite that bad, but something in that range. And so it was, for me at least, it was less shock about what happened and more, okay, this kind of clarifies everything. It cuts through it all. We all get on the same page, and it actually makes it so there's not much ambiguity left to play out here, I don't think. So we're going to have a clear answer, which I think is the best thing to have. I think the worst situation for SC and not that this is off the table, but I don't think that we have like a 9-win year with no real good wins and no real devastating losses. So it's just this weird
limbo
weird decision, and we have to get a 4-year deal or something.
The worst possible scenario, I think, is you're in a prolonged limbo, or even a commitment to limbo, which is you've re-signed Lane Kiffin. For a contract extension after he does something like goes 9-5 or 9-4. At that point, you really don't have a clear direction on the program. And yes, the big silver lining here is we kind of now know exactly where the ship is steering toward.
Yeah, yeah, and that's actually most of my preseason discussions with my SC friends was, okay, what's like best and worst case scenario? And best case scenario was like, I'm completely wrong about Kiffin. Has another great year. We bring in a gangbusters recruiting class. Or the other best case scenario is we have clarity on him not being the man, and he's gone, and we can kind of move on to the next thing. The worst thing is we're just wishy-washy. We have to, because coaches tend to get 4 to 5 year deals because we want to have that story to tell in recruiting, that we have to sign him again for 4 to 5 years. He off of like an 8 or 9 win year, and then the following year he bombs out. And now all we've done is extended pushed out the decision that ultimately would have had to be made 1 more year or 2 more years because we didn't have clarity in this season.
Right, and if you even notice, like one of the things, I mean, it's kind of been a pet peeve of mine, but it's look, I understand that there's a natural human desire to have the current system in place be successful, and you want to have some sort of measuring stick to say, look, this is the target we have to hit to prove that the current system is a success. So you've seen so much dialogue on various message boards, but just generally in the USC community about what is the minimum number of games Lane needs to win to retain his job. And the underlying theme there is not hey, what will it take to get rid of him? The underlying theme is, hey, what's going to take to re-sign him or to continue him on. Now, and that's fine because normally people want to be optimistic about their program, but it's very much because obviously, I mean, I've kind of not been in his camp. That's not a big shocker there. I didn't have faith in him. I've always kind of thought of this whole situation as limbo. And when to me, seeing questions like, what's the minimum possible we need to go on this way, that's a very frightening prospect to me. I'd say for USC, what I want is, what do we need to do to have the best possible program? And unless there was something that Lane could achieve in really some sort of short term to demonstrate that he is really the answer to USC's program, I'd much rather have us let's clear the slate, let's start anew, and let's look at what is the best possible scenario. Obviously, from the very beginning, thought this was a huge mistake to hire him. Now it's water under the bridge. We're way past that. But what we now have Saturday's game gives us a new opportunity to start anew and to look at who is it that we want to put in place as the kind of the chieftain to get our program where we want it to be.
Right. I have sort of a slightly different take on people who are talking about what is the amount of the magic number that gets Kiffin another year, an extension on his contract. I think what that is mostly is for people who are optimistic, that do acknowledge that this was kind of a make or break year. They're just it's just a thought experiment of, well, what is it going to be? Like let's set up a benchmark for this year, and wins and losses as sort of like crude a measure as it is to measure quality of the program. That's sort of the nice easy way to just say, like, all right, well, what I acknowledge that this person is potentially in trouble on a hot seat, not completely ignorant to that idea, and what does he have to do to overcome that obstacle? So I don't think those discussions were necessarily unhealthy. I mean, I think I agree with you to the extent that what you want is the situation you want to find yourself in is, oh my gosh, this coach is so great and such a perfect fit here. How are we going to keep him? The situation we found ourselves in with Carroll for so many years, which is the league going to lure him away? Could he possibly jump to these other programs? How can we possibly retain this guy? And I want to see him as our coach for another 10 years, and we're going to erect statues, and we're going to have 15 crystal trophies and blah blah blah. Like, that's the situation you want to find yourself in. But in lieu of that, if you're not in that situation, I don't think it's necessarily unproductive to talk about, well, what do we have to do to, the situation we're in, what does this coach have to do to keep his job and to satisfy us enough to earn himself another chance or a few chances at proving himself.
Right. I guess the reason the conversation scared me in this one instance, because to me it was plain that the only answer to that question was something like 20 consecutive victories or something way beyond what he'd be able to achieve in any event. So I was seeing this more from the lens of, well, he's obviously not going to do what we really want him to do, which is win every game by a blowout. What's going to happen is something less than that, and it's going to probably involve some losses, and it's probably going to involve us not winning the conference. And then we're going to have to evaluate whether to keep him on board because he had done something, he had improved upon last season or something along those lines. I think this gives us clarity. I mean, which is what look, I'm not happy. I root as hard as I can for USC to win every game, but it's so clear, and this did give us clarity, and it's something now we can look to the future with optimism. To me, this is true optimism. This is not trying to take something that was broken and turn it into some sort of perfect structure. This is now we can really start anew and really think about what we need.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that there is. I mean, I'm more hopeful right now than I was to see football, 4 to 6 months ago, when I thought this cannot go on. But we're stuck in a situation where we're still under sanctions. He just came off a 10-win year. You can't, in the interest of getting your next coach, it could potentially be a real roadblock to getting a high quality head coach if you're under sanctions. He gives you an 8-win year, a number 1 recruiting class, a preseason number 1 ranking, a 10-win team, and then after 1 year of poor performance and really just a bad streak at the end of the season, you just can him in the middle of that, and you try and bring in a new coach, say, hey, we have this year of sanctions. Yeah, we gave the last guy 3 years, but hey, we're going to throw X amount of dollars at you. Will you come on board? I think if you're a big fish in a small pond, like some of the top candidates are, why would you could look at it and say, well, on one hand, I can stay here for 10 years, make a ton of money too, and be courted by other big programs who don't offer quite as many obstacles as this one does, or I could just wait another year or two, or I could jump at this and take on a lot of risk and a lot of uncertainty, and this administration might not be in place when my contract's up, or might just do the same thing they just did to this guy who, served him pretty well a year ago. So I think there is some wisdom in bringing him back. It's not the decision I thought, looking at it from the lens of what Kiffin deserved, what should have happened, but I understand the logic, and I think there might have been some wisdom to it. And one other thing I wanted to mention, I'm sorry I'm kind of going on and on here.
That's why we pay the big bucks for this podcast, so you can stream of consciousness, man.
Yeah, I will. Please feel free to tell me to shut up. So, one other thing I'd say about the clarity issue is that I think it's important to acknowledge that there was really mixed signals. I was pretty much convinced that he wasn't a good hire, that he wasn't going to work out, that there were just too many flaws, and that that 2011 season, we talk about it, and it was a half a season of good games, but those were really good games, and we were on a real roll. And you have to also acknowledge what he did with Robert Woods and what he did with Lee was really impressive. I mean, he really developed those guys, and there's other, of course, counter to that, you have other examples of, well, Barkley somehow regressed after he was a 4-year starter, and our tight ends, showed flashes their freshman year, and they've kind of disappeared for a year now, and you have all these other examples.
Well, the counter examples are probably too numerous to go into in depth, but what you were talking about, I have to agree with that about 2011. I mean, look, you obviously you're a very pragmatic, open-minded guy, and I'm sometimes a guy who makes my opinions very, very quickly and then doesn't holds tight to them. After about a year and a half in the middle of 2011, and we're kind of sputtering through the second season of Lane, I really thought that this could turn into or let me put it this way. I had no reason at that point, midway through 2011, to second guess my initial assessment, which was, I remember posting literally a week and a half, maybe less than that, after Lane had been hired and all this stuff had kind of immediately come up about his transition away from Tennessee, and maybe there's some phone calls and there's all these controversies at the time. A lot of it was just Tennessee people being angry and just, venting, which it happens. But I didn't think it was a good timing for us because we were under the microscope of the NCAA. We actually hadn't resolved the sanctions matter. I don't think we'd actually even had our hearing before the Committee on Infractions at that point. I remember posting, Mike Garrett needs to go back and do whatever he just undid it. Even if it costs us $5 million, he needs to undo it right now. This was a huge mistake. Obviously, that did not go over well at the time. But even through 2011, I had really no reason, midway through the season, 2011, I had no reason to second guess what I had my opinion had been throughout. And then all of a sudden, midway through, it was like, what happened? Especially the month of November, where those 4 games in November, we're just clicking so well on offense. And I honestly thought, look, going into last season, going into 2012, I honestly thought Lane got it. I was convinced Lane finally got it, and we very well may win the national championship just because we're going to just start throwing the ball all over the field, and we have these 2 amazing receivers, and we got a great quarterback, great passing quarterback, and we are just going to terrify every team we play.
Yeah, it was. 2 things. I wasn't completely convinced that something had clicked for Lane, but I thought something had clicked. At least with the way the team kind of vibes with Lane. That might seem like a silly distinction, but it was like, okay, well, he might not. I still thought I had enough years of sort of evidence of Lane not looking like the kind of offensive mastermind that I think some people were pitching him as, to think that he put doubt going into 2012. But you had 10 returning starters on offense. So at the very least, there's so much continuity there. You're thinking, yeah, they might not be what they were when they were rolling at the end of the year, and the beginning of the year still happened, and we still had a hard time rolling. But, we'll be 80-90% of that to start, and we'll get it rolling again, because that's just kind of how these things almost always tend to happen, That's just, if you want to judge how good a team's going to be coming back, one of the first things you do is you look at how many returning starters they have. What was their record last year? How many returning starters? Based on that, this is probably, a top 15 team, or, is they're out of the top 25. They've lost too many players or whatever, right? And so to see that dramatic of a fall off was really striking. And it took me probably the first 4 or 5 games to really be like, this is not just last year. He's not just a slow starter. It's kind of a misfire. Sometimes the spark plug just doesn't happen. And if that doesn't happen, we go from, 1 to unranked.
Lane does have this aspect to his offenses that when they really start to roll, they start to roll. And obviously 2005, the personnel was outrageous, but they really started to roll. But the problem is when his offenses start hitting speed bumps, he has not shown an ability to make adjustments, even in the medium term. He might go 3 games to make 0 adjustments to compensate for what the problems are. And at the end of last season, we're hitting lots and lots of speed bumps on offense, and you just don't see adjustments being made. It is kind of funny because, we ended last season losing 5 of 6 games, and you heard so much talk that if we just had a better defense, all we needed was the better. Granted, Monty's defense at times, not always, but at times, you were kind of like, what's going on here? But you heard so much. If we just had better defense, we would have won 10 games against last year or whatever it is. This season really shows because our defense has played lights out. They have been. They played better in that Washington State game than I actually even thought it was possible. I thought for sure Washington State would score at least 2 offensive touchdowns. That's very reasonable for Mike Leach's team. They always score at least 2 offensive touchdowns. How could they score 3 points? The defense was really impressive, and It's, you know, I mean, that's one great thing to watch about our team. Unfortunately, I just don't know how many victories you can get in college football with only a defense. I mean,
yeah. Well, and you know, you have to also take into account how many bad positions our offense is putting the defense into too. I mean, the defense is obviously playing great. I'm still kind of holding off like this is a dominant like top 10 type defense until the level of competition steps up, because I'm still really worried about the corners. I think we faced two pretty mediocre quarterbacks. I think once we face Utah State and maybe even Reddick at BC, we'll get a better sense of how our corners and how our safeties are really holding up. I mean, you have to get credit to how they did against Washington State with that spread. I mean, there's so many receivers flying all over the field that I thought they did a fantastic job. But I'm still like reserving judgment a little bit on the DBs.
Well, right, and that's absolutely fair. I don't think that to be honest, it's too much pressure to put on them in any event. It's not fair for us to have expectations that they're going to be like the number one defense in the country. Realistically, they're not. I mean, that's fine, but to date, you could not have expected them to play any better than they've played so far. Especially with kind of the inexperience and the kind of iffiness at cornerback. And they have performed, and it's you know, what is going on the offensive side of the ball right now is just, I mean, it's disturbing. I guess is the best way to put it. And this is going to have repercussions for Lane probably for a long time, because he is just an offensive guru, and the fact that he really hasn't been able to adjust for so many games now to scoring.
One of the important kind of themes to look at is, you know, and it is one of the things I think I underthought a little bit coming into the season was, you know, we have 7 offensive coaches, and the player development is shoddy. The play calling is like very limited. It's a bizarre situation. But you know, I think one of the things I underthought was evaluating like how Lane does when he has a lot of time to prepare. So we've kind of touched on this before, I think, on the boards. Is, you know, the third quarter scoring is abysmal, and that's when he has time to sort of game plan during the game and make adjustments. And the first quarter scoring isn't that great either. But once we're kind of in the flow, the second and fourth quarter scoring is actually pretty good. And then you look at his bowl record. I think he's 0-2 in bowl games. I know he got blown out when he was at Tennessee in his bowl game.
Yes, he got blown out. He got blown out at Tennessee. Obviously, Georgia Tech was underwhelming.
Right. So when you give him a lot of time to prepare, it's almost like maybe it's paralysis by analysis or what, but it almost seems to work against him. And so, you know, you talk about coming into this season, well, we've got these 2 quarterbacks, and he's going to figure it all out. And I think I gave maybe too much deference to, well, with that much time, he'll kind of figure things out. When I think maybe the reality was, with that much time, he might overthink it or think himself into a corner where it ends up being kind of a mess. And it seems like that's what happened. I mean, if I'm just placing a lot of my own kind of theories and thoughts on this, but it looks like what's happening is he didn't really do like the deep philosophical thinking that he needed to do. That apparently, it's one game, but it looks like that's what Sarkisian did, where he thought, all right, the game is changing. How can I adapt to survive in this environment? I think Lane sort of stubbornly stuck to my way works. I just got to figure out a way to make these pieces work in my way. Yes. You know, and I think that's flawed thinking, if indeed that's what he did.
Yeah, you know, the interesting thing about Sark, and I have some of it insight into him, you know, I think Sark has a much better grasp on his own limitations, which is, for all human beings, including myself, it's good to have, to know what you're not really good at. And, you know, even notwithstanding that Sark's been going like 7-6 every single year, he has been making adjustments constantly. He's been tinkering with things. He seems open to the concept that whatever he had in place initially was not perfect. You don't see a lot of self-examination from Lane. And it is interesting. I don't know if it is paralysis by analysis, but that makes sense because, you know, we start season slow. The layoff before the bowl games, we come out flat.
Right.
We start halves of games slow. It is exactly the more time you give him to prepare, the results are going to be poor.
Right. That is what it seems like. It's so counterintuitive, and like the halftime adjustment, the contrast between him and Carroll is so striking. I mean, Carroll, even if you were down 14 at half, you go, Carroll's been saving up all his adjustments. He's going to implement them at half, and we're just gonna knock these guys on their asses in the third quarter. They have no idea what's coming. So you had this sort of developed faith over time with Carroll that he was so far ahead of the curve that we were never going to get blown out, and we're never really in big trouble. And I don't feel the same faith after watching Lane coach USC for 4 years now.
No, that's right. And even the early Carroll period, what's most striking about that, it wasn't just the defense. I mean, it was very stark with the defense because we would just go lights out on defense in the second half. But the offense, it was as if we were kind of, it was almost as though we used early parts of the game to explore and expose what the other team was doing. Now, you don't get any sense that there's a purpose to our play calling either early in the games or later in the games. Everything is it's almost as though that Lane has been dropped into a situation and he's going to do the same exact thing no matter what time of the game he's in. So if he's at the beginning of the game or later in the game, he's essentially just going to go out there and run his little thing. And at some point, after doing it for a while and failing, he finally gives up on it. But that you don't see any attempt for him to diagnose what the other team is doing and then counter it. And right. I mean, what other teams have been doing, quite frankly, it's to me, it's actually not that complex. They know that we're not going to try to fully exploit the entire field. They know that there are certain areas of the field they don't have to really defend strongly. And for whatever reason, we never really make an adjustment to that, maybe until way, way too late in the game.
Right. Yeah, and I think one of the confusing things for me at least is, a lot of people attribute this stuff to Lane's just arrogant and he's just set in his ways and stubborn, and that may be true. But I think also what gets underrated is, he doesn't have a real diversity of experience in terms of his mentorship years. He only came up under Chow, and then him and Sark were equals, right? And then he was off to be a head coach, and he bombed out in Oakland, and then he was just that 1 year in Tennessee. So I think it looks like arrogance in some light, and then in another sense, it looks like he's not using a lot of tools because maybe he hasn't really developed that many tools. Maybe it's not overconfidence, but it's just confidence in a smaller array of tools that he feels comfortable using. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. No, if you have to go to your toolbox, and you go and open your toolbox, and you've got a hammer and a screwdriver and some duct tape, and what you really need is a drill. Well, you're going to use the hammer, the screwdriver, and the duct tape because you don't have a drill. Right. And this is kind of, I think this might be part of the situation he's found himself in. He obviously has extreme resistance to trying to update kind of our offensive philosophy and what we do on offense with kind of the changing game of football. And we've talked about this in the previous podcast where he told Taj Boyd, "Hey, we don't want you here at Tennessee." Not in a mean way, but look, he basically told Taj Boyd, "You're not the kind of quarterback I want to use." But unfortunately, he's not getting. Taj Boyd is the kind of quarterback that he needed to use. I mean, there are very few teams that can now get away with not having a Taj Boyd, and I don't think that Lane Kiffin is really one of them. He's going to be finding himself that if he wants to succeed in football going forward, he's going to need a playmaker at quarterback. Because if he doesn't have one, the results are starting to speak for themselves what's going to happen. He's not going to land in a situation where he's got the number one overall offensive lineman for 2 consecutive drafts on his team. That's just not the normal situation in football. He's got if he's gonna ever come back, he's going to need playmakers because really playmakers is the only thing that makes this offense work.
Yeah, that's the troubling aspect to the offense, and we tried to, there's a lot of resistance on the message boards about this, but yeah, when you say like you need a All-American at like, or All-American level player at 5-6 positions on offense, then you don't have a scheme that's helping your players. What you should be trying to attain is I have a scheme that where I can plug in a guy who's been in my system for 1 year, and he might not be All-American level, but he will produce. I'll be able to put him in, find a way to get him into space, or be able to limit the offense in such a way that I can make so it's operating in a comfortable way for his skill set. And that was one of the first things that really impressed me about Harbaugh was you saw what he did with Tavita Pritchard, and you go, this is a quarterback with, if there's like 15 skills you need to be a great quarterback, he had like 1.5 of them. And you go, there's no way you can win with this guy, is what I thought. And you watch it, he made a functional team out of that. Like, they weren't a great team, but he made that offense function. So you brought this up earlier. I just wanted to kind of go back to it. And I think this is actually really relevant now because the way the fans are sort of adapting to the new reality with USC is, almost everybody seems to be on board that, it's an eventuality that Kiffin's going to be gone. When we got Lane, I thought in the first, 12 hours that we were absorbing this news, I sensed a fair amount of apprehension, like, really? Like, this doesn't make sense. How does this make sense? And, how am I, like, some people trying to talk themselves into it and some people, being upset about it or whatever. And I think one of the things that really sort of made us all coalesce around Lane is you had this insane reaction from the Tennessee fans. Yeah. They were just furious, and they were acting like they were just like ready to riot in the streets. And you kind of go like, it's just football.
Yeah.
It's just football. But that made us, I think, the natural fan reaction is to kind of defend your guy. And what's ironic about it to me is that I think the reason that the Tennessee fans were so loyal is because Lane went and stuck his neck out and and said a bunch of antagonistic things in the SEC, and they were put in a position to defend him. And now he bolts on them, and so they're like, well, wait a minute, we've been sticking up for you this whole time. They have this big overreaction, and now it sort of almost gets paid forward to our fan base. And so I think we would have had a little bit more clarity on evaluating, was this a good hire? Is this the best we could have done at the time? Had we not had that sort of emotional reaction to what was going on in Tennessee? And I think it's really important to think through those things when you're going through a coaching change, just so you have a little bit of clarity going forward when you're talking about the circumstances of how he was hired, when he was hired, and for what reason, and what the kind of plan is. Because I think we find ourselves, 2 years later, we're still fighting over, kind of silly issues that shouldn't be fought over. And if we had really kind of had more honest and more like consistent and calm conversation in the beginning, I think we would have saved ourselves a lot of angst and a lot of like silly arguments later on down the line.
You're right. If it hadn't been for those Tennessee fans, I think people would not have jumped on board with both feet so kind of aggressively and confidently. And well, look, everything we're saying now just underscores how important it is that we approach the next hire in a way that rather than making it someone who looks good, or we can justify it to like a fan base. I mean, the John Robinson 2 hire was very similar, right? It was essentially, hey, John Robinson had led all these great USC teams in the late 70s and the very early 80s. When we bring him back, it was almost like, hey, this looks great to the fan base. I mean, but I think if you were a knowledgeable football fan at the time, it probably didn't make a lot of sense. Right now, I think the key is when we can discuss this in a further podcast because we're running out of time. But when we make this next hire, there's going to be certain criteria we've got to focus on, and those are the things we've got to hit. It's not how good it's going to look to the fan base because they recognize the name or these guys all seem familiar to us. Having a USC on your resume should be probably the least important thing as a criteria you can even think about. There's certain things you should be looking for and what's going to make a successful head football coach in the year 2014.
Yeah, USC connection is a nice to have. But let me ask you this. What was the last coach that USC hired where you would say that demonstrated a lot of vision, hiring that person?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, you can make arguments about some recent hires, but generally speaking, our coaching hires have not demonstrated very much vision.
I mean, the best you could say is, well, look, they did have to sign off on Carroll, but if you recall, like how the search went down with Carroll, he was like the fourth or fifth choice after we offered Erickson, I think Bellotti, Riley.
Well, we definitely looked at them very hard, and I know we wanted Erickson very badly, and I remember that very much. And that would have been a very different. Obviously, I mean, Erickson at the time, I think he would have actually done okay at USC. Obviously, we would not have had near the success we had with Carroll, Erickson would have done okay. But yeah, we absolutely we just went. There were all these other good teams in the Pac-12 or the Pac-10 at the time, and we just went and looked at all their head coaches. I mean, that's basically what we did. There wasn't a lot of vision there. I mean, Carroll, a really clever AD may have hired Carroll in the first instance, seeing what he brought to the table. But yes, he fell into our lap.
Yeah, well, and I don't discredit Garrett for not having the vision to court Carroll because. Unless my recollection is incorrect, Carroll went hard after that job. He'd been out of work. I think he was still under contract with New England. So he had a year to kind of recollect himself, and he went hard after the job. So I think it was one of those things like he just put himself in front of Garrett and made him consider it.
Yes, absolutely.
So he courted the job, and that's. But still, you do have to give Garrett credit at least, and I'm not a huge Garrett fan, but you got to give him credit for at least saying all right, yeah, let's roll with this. I'm going to stake my reputation on this. So to some degree, I think to bring it back to the vision question, that does demonstrate a little bit of vision. But I think we were getting to the point in the search at that point where we were starting to look at some really weird candidates. I mean, the one that always sticks in my head was, and this wasn't just one article. There was probably I think 4 or 5 articles at the time. Sonny Lubick was rumored to be one of the guys on the
I believe it was. I think it was Sonny Lubick. And wasn't he 60 at the time?
He was 63, and he'd been pretty good at Colorado State, but you just go wait, what? This is what we're down to?
Yeah.
So it's and I don't want to go back a couple steps. I don't want to understate the importance of. You do have to have somebody who you can sell to the fan base. You do have to have kind of a name. I mean, this is a fan base that likes to fashion themselves like a premier program, and it is. But they like to have, I think all of the alums who go to their parties or whatever, going to work every day, like to say, hey, you see who we got, and he has done X, Y, and Z.
Right.
So if you get the guy who's not a big name, I think there's a bit of an underwhelming factor, even if you feel like he's got the DNA of an elite coach. So I get that they have to do that to a degree, but I think proportionally they seem to be overvaluing the brand of the coach over the skills of the coach. And I think that's kind of how we ended up getting into a situation where we hired Lane and the assistant staff that came with him.
Yeah, absolutely, that's the case. All right, I think we're gonna have to wrap it up on this week's podcast because we're getting pretty late here, but. We have a couple out-of-conference games coming up here before we get back to conference play. They're both at home, and they're both. I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be a hater. But they're both.
Be honest.
But they're both evidently losable games, and I'm not. It's going to a lot of what's going to happen with the rest of the season, at least, and for the foreseeable future for SC is going to be kind of dictated what happens over these next few weeks. So, that being said, do you have any thoughts on these games coming up?
Yeah, so I personally have the belief that we're going to bounce back a little bit against Boston College. I think that we should improve on offense. At least picking a quarterback will give us some clarity. Maybe, having that clarity and having somebody who's going to practice and with the ones all week and is going to, knows he's going to play the whole game. Maybe that'll help the passing game. It can't be much worse than it was in the last game. I think we're going to probably do well against Boston College. I actually do think we're going to lose to Utah State. That quarterback of theirs is really good. So I'm concerned. I think that's kind of how it's going to play out. My personal feeling is that if I were to guess, And I'm not big on mid-season coaching replacements, but if I were to guess, I would say that if it goes out like I think it's going to go, where we beat BC, lose to Utah State, and I think we'll probably lose to Arizona State. The next week after that is a bye, and that seems like the timing of, if you're going to do the mid-season interim coach thing, that's the time to do it. So if things play out like I think they're going to play out with the wins and losses, that seems like the time that it's going to happen. At that point, we're going to have, if things go like I think, we're going to have a Coliseum full of a lot of angry people, a lot of boos, a lot of and not a lot of no-shows too. It's going to be really rough. The optics of it are going to be really bad. And you're going to have a lot of fans, the few fans that show up and the few fans that are watching on television are going to have a really bad taste in their mouth. So the only thing that can really kind of save them is like big blowouts where the people that do show up are happy and everybody goes, hey, you know what? Actually, things are going better. It wasn't as bad as we thought. Yep. But that seems like that's a far way. That's right. A long ways away. Right?
Well, I kind of think what you just said was pretty prophetic. I have a feeling. I too think that bye week is an interesting target. I had thrown out to a couple friends 4.5 games as the over-under on how much longer this tenure might last. I'm actually thinking now, it could be 2.5 weeks might be a decent over-under. I know I could be way off and he could coach out the rest of the season. There's but I don't necessarily think it's a bad over-under to call 2.5 weeks, 2.5 games. On that happy note, thanks for joining us, Sano, and we'll do this again next week, and hopefully be a little cathartic, and maybe we'll be happy about that. So who knows?